Welcome, everyone, to our brand new podcast called Getting Deep with a PhD and a JD.
I'm Nikki. I am a PhD. I am a professor at an urban university, and I teach research and human behavior.
And I am Kimmy, the JD of this duo. I currently work with a continuing education provider for attorneys, and I also have my own estate planning practice.
So you must be wondering, what is this podcast all about? Well, this podcast is a spirited and analytical discussion about relevant news topics that are not a part of your daily timeline. Not only will you learn something new, you will be inspired to action. Hey, Kimmy.
Hey, Nikki. We're back at it.
We are. And I have another question for you.
I'm ready.
So, is it true that we have one person, one vote?
That is a very interesting question because a lot of us feel as if we do not. And I think with our current political structure, it's kind of it's a loaded question. It's almost as if you can't really, answer the question straightforward, because in some ways we do, and in some ways we really don't, if we really look into our political system. And, one of the things that I found is that, there are a lot of people who are discouraged or even apathetic about voting. And some of the sentiments that I hear are that people are tired of feeling like they have to vote for the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
And I think the way that our system is set up, it sort of ends up being that situation. And I would say in the most recent, election cycles that we've had, probably in the past, 2 decades, I would say, is where it feels that way. And, when I was researching it and looking into it, there were a couple of things that sort of lends itself to a system where it creates apathetic voters or discouraged voters, or where you're presented with the lesser of two evil options to vote for. And one of those things is the primary system. So what I found with the primary system was that, in certain jurisdictions, certain people who are also tired of the two-party system, they are independents. And so in a lot of the primaries, certain independents are unable to vote if they're not associated with that particular party. And so it really depends on your state. So that's one reason. And then go ahead if you want to jump.
I was just going to say something about primaries. I think with primaries, people feeling really disadvantaged because of primaries, because a lot of times with primaries, you have people who are more, if you're talking about one group, they're more to the extreme ends of the parties. Mm-hmm. And so if they're the folks selecting the candidates, then they're going to select candidates that are very, very far away from the middle ground. And so you may have a situation where, for example, you have a very, 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 very conservative person and a very, 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 very liberal person. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot, like when you look at the statistics, most people tend to be kind of in the middle. If they're conservative, they tend to be not at that extreme. And if they're liberal, they tend to be not at that extreme. And so it makes it difficult for those people to feel inspired to go and vote just because of the extreme ends.
Yeah. And I think that, it's like your party that you associate with, most of us decide to go ahead and choose, which party we're going to be, right?
Yeah.
And, you're a lot of times left with the internal party politics as well.
Politics.
It's like
Yes.
there's politics within the party.
Right.
And it's almost like, well, it's this person's turn. And it's like, well, who decided that? Like,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
decided that
Yeah. There's
that
like an
another
old
person had to wait?
boys. There's like that. There's still an old boys network, even within the political structure, that says, okay, certain people need to wait their turn, and
Yeah.
they need to work their way up through the ranks. And so a lot of people get very discouraged by the internal politics of the political organizations, even.
Exactly. Exactly. And then one of the other things that I think is that contributes to the apathy is gerrymandering.
Yeah.
I just don't know that people realize how manipulative gerrymandering has become, and has always been, more than likely, right?
Right.
And with gerrymandering, it's like your politicians are choosing their voters
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
instead of the voters choosing their
Their
politicians.
politicians. Yeah. They are choosing the groups because they're basically carving out the sections for each district and making them, or precinct, they're making the specific areas.
Mm-hmm.
And they make it easy for certain groups to win, or if we flip it, they make it more difficult for certain groups to lose.
Yeah, and it's like, it's funny because you and I had a discussion that we were going to sort of integrate different kinds of topics in our episodes that don't involve race, but everything in this country involves race.
I know race is so prominent within everything, and
You can't get away from it.
we have to admit that, because we go back to how our country was founded. In fact, I was doing some research and thinking about our current political structure and the way it evolved, and race is all over that. If you say, show me the receipts, race would be the one that like cash the check. So the thing is, because when we think about how, like, electorates, like the electoral college system, we think about how we decided how many electorates people received, and it's all intertwined. Like, even when people were deciding, okay, how is our political system going to be set up? And we think back to the 3/5 compromise, when the southern states had all of this population that happened to be enslaved blacks.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had your northern states where they didn't have the agricultural needs for the enslaved persons. And so you had a lot more people who.
Because tell me that statistic again. That really.
I read a statistic that just shocked me, and it said that in 1787, that 60% of the folks who lived in Virginia were enslaved blacks.
Right.
That which so shocked me. I thought, I knew that they had a lot of enslaved folks, but I guess I just, it just shocked me that it would be that high. Right. Exactly. The majority of folks. And so, people were debating, okay, well, if we're going to do this by number, if we're going to say, okay, the population, well, what does a black person count? How do we count that person? So they even made the compromise, the 3/5 compromise, that said a black person counts as 3/5 of a person. So even our political structure, is wrapped up into race and into the whole institution of slavery with enslaved folks.
And and what's interesting is, when I was researching the gerrymandering piece, right? And you talk about how 60% were enslaved persons in Virginia at that time. It's like the more things change, the more they stay the same. Because one of the things that came up in my research, and and this is something that I think a lot of people have been talking about, is Mississippi, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you have, so, gerrymandering makes it so that certain populations don't have the political power that they should have if we're
Right.
talking about a representative type of government.
Exactly.
So Mississippi is that example. And according to some of the latest census data, African Americans made up almost 40% of the population in Mississippi. But there has never been more than one Black person on their state Supreme Court.
And you say,
And
how does that happen? How
the
is that?
gerrymandering, and you've
Yeah.
seen those maps where the lines just are like over the place because they're
Right. Right.
trying to minimize the voting power across different districts,
Right.
so that a particular population only has power to vote in that one jurisdiction, as opposed to
Yes.
they may have had power in a variety of
Variety.
jurisdictions or districts.
Exactly.
And so that it's that piece as well that has contributed to the apathy, I think,
Right.
and the fact that in some ways there isn't one person, one vote,
Right.
especially when you calculate the Electoral College and its
College.
history,
Yeah.
the
And
primaries. Yeah.
oh, and I was going to say that we have had multiple elections where, and if we think about even in our lifetime, our lives, we've
Mhm.
seen where folks win for the presidential election. They win the popular
Yeah.
vote, but they do not win the presidency.
Yeah. Yes.
And in researching, some folks who really believe that the Electoral College is a great thing will say, well, you don't want your major population areas, like you may have 4 major population areas in the country. You don't want those major population areas to really drive what goes on in the
To
country.
control it all the time.
To control it all,
Which
yeah.
I get. I mean, I get
Yeah,
it.
I can understand that. But when you
Mhm.
really think about it, the system that we have, the Electoral College system, really is not working, because what's happening is we have some places, and do you know that for some places it's winner take all, but you don't have that for all of our states. So for some of our states, if you win X percentage, then they divide up the electoral votes for that specific state.
Mhm.
But
Mhm. Mhm.
for Virginia, it's a winner take all. So it doesn't matter if a person wins all of these votes. It's the person who wins that one vote, the majority.
Right.
That's the person who gets all of those electoral votes.
And
I found it
break down.
interesting.
Mhm.
I
That's
found it
breakdown.
interesting.
Mhm.
The one person, Ross Perot, and I had to write this down. I think it was
I
in
remember
90,
Ross Perot.
was it in 90? Was it in 92
You know why I
or
remember
was it
Ross
in?
Perot? Because I remember Different World did an episode, and it was I think it was a dream sequence,
Oh,
and one of the characters on Different World was the Ross Perot of the group.
oh, yeah.
So I remember that. Yeah, that's why I remember Ross Perot.
Do you know? And I definitely remember Ross Perot because I remember watching the debates, and I remember watching a lot in 92, because
Mhm.
in 92 Ross Perot won 19% of the popular vote, which seems, I had to go and I had to double check that number, because that seems like an absurd amount of votes to get, and he
Mhm.
won 0 electoral votes, because
Mhm.
the votes that he won, the votes were not
It was
from
the
a
majority.
specific, they weren't accumulated in one specific area.
Okay.
So he didn't win the electoral votes for any states, because
Mhm.
his votes, he won a good percentage of them, but they were
Yeah.
from different places within
Yeah.
the United States. So therefore, he didn't win any electoral votes.
Yeah.
So if you go merely on the electoral votes to say, okay, tell me about how people voted. What percentage of support does this person have? The Electoral College is not necessarily the best way to look at that.
Yeah. Mhm.
You know?
Yeah. That's very interesting. And one of the things that I feel is, something good going on is in June of this year, the Supreme Court had before it an issue involving the Voting Rights Act. And so, there's been a lot of talk about the Voting Rights Act and how, certain occurrences have sort of chipped away at the power of the Voting Rights Act. But this one case actually did the opposite. And this is where the Supreme Court actually struck down Alabama's 2021 redistricting laws. Yes. So those laws were determined to be violative of the Voting Rights Act by what they call packing Black communities in a way that unfairly limits their political power. So it was a really good win for, making our political system more fair and more representative, which is what it's supposed to be. And this was a case that was spearheaded by the ACLU. So this was in Alabama. And so what I was reading is that the Mississippi chapter of ACLU is looking at that case closely to see how it could apply there in Mississippi. Because, Mississippi is, it's just atrocious.
Yes.
The districting occurred in Mississippi and what the end results were.
Absolutely.
So
and, I want
to
say something about Mississippi, Alabama, like all these deep South states. When we look at those states, and I'm going to bring it up again. I'm going to bring up the institution of slavery.
Yeah.
And because it just seems to me like we still have a lack of Black voices and political power in those areas. And when you look at those areas, on every indicator, those are the states that are low on every indicator, from maternal mortality, education, health care, everything. It's, these Southern states, and we think the legacy of slavery and enslaved folks. So I just had to bring that up. I know we were talking about something good, but we have to remember how we got to this point. Now we're getting some things that are good, and I am glad that they're going to be looking at Mississippi, because Mississippi has been
a problem,
just a problem. And we have relatives, our ancestors. We have some ancestors that were in Mississippi, and so
our grandmother.
Yes, our grandmother and great grandmother were both
right.
in Mississippi before Louisiana. And so one of the things that I want to say that I think is really great is there's an organization called Unite America, and uniteamerica.org. I encourage folks to go and check it out.
Yes.
And they are a group of Democrats, Republicans, and independents who really understand that there's something fundamentally broken. There was something that's fundamentally not correct with the current way that we are engaging with elections. That people are not involved like they should be, and we just don't have. People aren't educated either. Like because people aren't taking the time to get educated on the issues and the candidates. We're fed sound bites, and that's what people are really getting. They're not really taking time. And so they're really looking at a couple of things. They're looking at supporting open primaries. So in other words, in many places, in order to participate in the primary, you have to register for a specific party. And
only two.
And that really prevents some folks from really participating because they're consider themselves independent, right? And honestly, those independents are probably people who are really thinking about the issues and thinking about their needs, maybe even a little bit more than folks who say, okay, I'm always going to vote for this party, or I'm always going to vote for this party. So we want independents to participate.
Yes.
Also, ranked choice voting. I had not heard of this.
Yeah, neither had I.
And but when I did hear about it, I thought, huh, that sounds really interesting. So this um, Unite America
Hmm.
uh, organization, it really supports ranked choice voting. And this is where you can have a bunch of people running for office, right? And it kind of like you may have a bunch of independents, Democrats, Republicans are all running together, but then people are voting, they're ranking their vote. And the people who win like the most out of the votes, those are the people who then go on to the general election.
Right.
So you could technically have an independent and a Democrat running, or a
Right.
Republican and another Republican, or a Democrat
Right.
and another Democrat. And
Hmm.
I think that that's really great because what that is it's supporting the people that people really support and really feel are the highest, instead of saying, okay,
We're
a
going to put forth
small,
this person,
exactly, a
and this
very
is the person
small
you have to vote
proportion.
for.
Yeah. And remember what we said about primaries. Um, People vote in primaries at a reduced rate than
Hmm.
people who vote in the general,
Right.
election. So I think that that would be wonderful. And it would also, I feel like it would get some candidates who say, "Oh, I'm very committed to running for office, but I don't think I could get my party's nomination." I
Hmm.
think that it would help some of those people, maybe some of those grassroots people who may be more committed and who might not be as entrenched within the specific political parties. It would give them an
The
option.
politics of the
Yes.
political
It would
parties.
give them an option to be seen and to have their voices heard and
Because
to
that
participate in the
reminds me
election.
of what's his name? The old guy from Vermont,
Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like the political system, the way that it is, sort of took the air out of his his political campaign, really.
Yeah.
Because of the two-party system, and then the politics within those parties,
Right.
closed
Right.
primaries, all the
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
And yeah, so go ahead. So open primaries, ranked voting,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
So they really support those. And they
mhm,
also track different legislation, and
mhm.
they look at like I encourage folks just to go to their website and just check it out,
Yes.
because they do provide information, and they provide it in a way that's easy to read, um, and that I feel has just been really helpful to looking at, helpful as we look at the election and how people are voting and different things. I think it's great. So
Yeah, I
I
do
think that's
too.
a yeah, I think that's a
Because
positive thing.
I think the when we're talking about our political system that is so entirely woven into the fabric of this country, it's going to take a concerted, organized, efficient, and very intentional,
Right.
you know, um, action
Right.
to, unweave. I don't know if that's a word. It's going to take a lot, and
Yeah.
and so when
Yeah.
when I first discovered this organization, I was like, oh wow, okay. So instead of it just being a complaint or one person deciding, well, I'm going to run and I'm going to be in opposition of the system, and
Hmm.
that never works. It
Yeah.
never works,
Yeah.
and it ends up sometimes in a result that, like we recently had,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
the person being elected is the most evil of the two, right? So
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah.
be much more intentional, and you have to be much more, like I said, organized and efficient. And
Right.
so, organizations like this
Hmm.
definitely makes sense to me, and it really is, something good. That's on the horizon,
Absolutely.
or already in the works.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I also think that like when we had, so right now we have a Republican governor, but in the primary for the Democratic, or the Democrat who was the opposing
Hmm.
person, they had two candidates. They had Jennifer Foy and Jennifer McClellan, two Black women who ran against Terry McAuliffe for the Democratic nomination. And I really feel like folks didn't vote for the two Black women or one of the two Black women because they felt like, okay, we want to win and we believe that folks will vote for a male and a male who is white. So I think ranked choice voting would have helped folks to understand that these two women did have some support and did have a lot of support. And putting everyone together and making people choose, making them rank, and then figuring it out. It just seems like a win-win. I mean, it seems like you
It's
would
too much
also, yeah, yeah,
it is too much like right. So
yeah.
So let's talk about what the call to action is.
The
because
call to
remember,
action.
folks, we don't want to just be two talking heads to you and just adding to the discourse without any sort of solution that we want to put out there. So this last segment, our call to action segment, in my mind, I would say that the call to action for me is there are organizations that are already in place and already out there doing really good work. And I feel like we've forgotten about them, namely the ACLU and the NAACP. As I mentioned earlier, the ACLU, they were the folks, spearheading the lawsuit in Alabama, and the Voting Rights Act. And they were successful. So, we already have structures in place. So I would say to you, if you're saying, okay, well, what can I do about this? The first thing, is, seek out those organizations, seek out how you can volunteer time, or even just, educate yourself on what's going on, what the recent issues are. And then number two, the call to action is, for me, is vote.
Yes.
Not voting is not a response.
Right. Well, you know what? I want to not voting is not a response. Not voting is not a response, but it's still an action. And not voting is where you get that apathy.
Yes.
And I want to remind you, Kimmy, our parents, in particular, our mothers, were very much into voting rights. And I remember my mother telling me the story of getting arrested for being in a sit-in where she was out there trying to get the right to vote unencumbered. Because in law, the law said, oh, yes, you have the right to vote. But what did they have? They had poll taxes. They had literacy tests.
Yes.
They had intimidation, which was probably the biggest thing, because they would have the KKK. And I know my mom told me the story about the KKK coming to her house.
Oh, I didn't know that story.
Yes, they came to her house, and my great-grandmother actually burned one of them with an iron. She had the iron because that was the only thing that she had. That was the only weapon that she could pick up to try to do that, because they would have, the KKK was well known for lynching people, and our family really wanted the right to vote unencumbered, right?
Yes.
So
they contributed. They contributed
exactly
to, railing against the system in the way that they could. And
absolutely,
that's what everyone can do.
They took the call to action seriously. They were out there in the trenches getting arrested,
burning
physical burning people up with irons. No, mama, not the iron. For those of you who don't know, that's a quote from Good Times. That's a quote from Good Times. No, from Janet Jackson. Janet Jackson was on Good Times. She was Penny.
I was gonna say, AKA Penny.
Penny, yes. Oh no, mama, not the iron.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Do you have any other calls to action before we wrap up?
I would just say educate yourself. Educate yourself. A lot of people don't know what district they live in, or where their voting location is, or what's on the ballot, or a lot of things about their state laws. I would say learn as much as you can. And there are some different organizations, for example, and the name escapes me right now, but I actually signed up, and on a weekly basis, they send me, they send updates on what the General Assembly is voting on each week. Like when it's in session, they send these things to me. They also have a little, I guess it's not an app, but I guess it's a feature where you can put in your zip code, and they'll tell you all about where you vote and what's so they're just really, really helpful. And I'll try to put that in our show notes so that you all can click onto it, because I thought I think it's been really helpful. Sometimes I just see it and I like read the first crawl and I'm like, okay, I got it, and I'll just delete it without officially opening it. But a lot of times I will open it and check it out, because it does contain some great information.
Yeah, because every day you can learn something new, just like through our research on this topic and others. I think you and I learned something new.
Absolutely.
Something new.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So with that said, this was another great episode, Nikki. So until the next time, make sure you like and subscribe.
Absolutely.
If you want to suggest a topic or something, that you want to learn more about that you don't, let us know, and we'll be happy to talk about it.
Absolutely, yes. Please put comments. We definitely want comments, because we can see that folks view, we can see what people view. But hey, we really would love to have you tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, or what you'd like to see us talk about next time. So please consider that would be our days.